When I was pregnant, I learned that newborns, expelled from the seas of their amniotic home, learn to breathe air by following the rhythms of their mother's breath. I worried a lot about my breathing. In her important essay on situated knowledges, feminist science studies and environmental scholar Donna Haraway teaches us that all vision is prosthetic. When we see the world, she argues, human binocular vision is the prosthetic that determines how and what we see. No God's eye view here. Seeing the world or knowing it in any other way is only ever via an embodiment that is always also already prosthetic. So seeing or knowing this way, not that. Seeing or knowing through this lens and not that one. One's human bodily affordances, such as binocular vision or bipedal movement or a capacity for empathy or rational judgment, but also one's sex and one's age, one's language, one's habits, one's exposures, one's imaginaries, one's historical and geographical location in time and space, all of these things are uniquely entangled to compose a specific body's prosthetics of seeing and of knowing. Yet we rarely consider that breathing is prosthetic too. What and how we breathe is also a question of specific capacities and affordances. So lungs versus gills, or skin versus mouth, a capacity to extract oxygen from water versus the terrifying prospect of a windpipe filling with wet. While we might readily understand breathing as species specific, like Haraway, we must also add that not all humans are situated in relation to breath in the same way. Breathing is never neutral. Difficulty breathing, for example, has been analyzed under the rubrics of settler atmospherics or as socio-atmospherics of power, whereby racism and colonialism are material phenomena that affect the effects of which are activated when they meet certain bodies, Black and brown bodies. We are reminded that air quality is a question of environmental justice and that the weaponization of air and breath targets certain populations differently within settler capitalist white supremacies. So as Tim Choi writes, quote, atmospheres do not equalize and breathing together rarely means breathing the same. Feminist Black scholar Christina Sharp argues that breathlessness as weather has always accompanied Black life, from Frantz Fanon's understanding of the connection between revolt and an inability to breathe, to, of course, Eric Garner's final words on a New York sidewalk, I can't breathe. White feminist philosopher Luce Irigaray worries that we've forgotten about air. But that is not the only forgetting that should concern us. While some breathing prosthetics are obvious, gills, lungs, or an inhaler, a scuba mask, an oxygen tank, in our current climate, we have neutralized and forgotten all of the other prosthetics that allow some bodies to breathe without noticing. Unstressed lungs, high ground, white-collar job, white skin. These are the things that allow aerial matter to remain unthought. As terrestrial weathers heat up, they are spared even more intense effects of rising temperatures as the seas relieve from them a large portion of this burden. In other words, the watery world is a convenient resting place for all that heat, and the oceans are getting warmer. But rising ocean temperatures mean that the sea is also suffocating. Whereas in the last 50 years, overall oxygen levels in the world's oceans have dropped by an average of 2%, in coastal zones, hypoxic conditions have increased far more dramatically. Dead zones in the ocean where oxygen is almost or totally depleted have quadrupled since the 50s. Even small changes in sea temperatures dramatically affect the behavior, reproductive patterns, and movements of ocean creatures, which has reverberations up and down ocean food webs, affecting oxygen levels in turn. For phytoplankton, hotter water temperatures mean moving to different habitats and becoming smaller, which affects their ability to soak up the carbon we are pumping out. As the oceans grow warmer, the capacity of the deep to draw down carbon also decreases. So simply put, in multiple and reinforcing ways, all of our greenhouse gas and fossil fuel desires are starting to take up all of the oxygen in that watery room. We are weather makers, even in the places our bodies do not and cannot belong. This might be ironic, if not so devastating, even as we may still imagine the oceans as an unfathomable elsewhere, the convenient dump for out of sight and out of mind discards, and the ultimate away washer of all of our sins. Our weather making returns to us as humans in multiple ways. Ocean photosynthesizers gift to every human, or rather gift to humans every second breath we take, meaning that human air breathers like ourselves will also be profoundly affected by the suffocation of the seas. We are making the ocean breathless, but in turn deoxygenating ourselves. The breathless sea reminds us that bad weather is a problem for all kinds of bodies, not only human ones, but for life below the waves as well. Climate justice is radically extended to a multi-species justice of the deep, where the liveliness of the ocean is itself at stake. But must we not also ask, what is lost when the words, "I can't breathe," slip, almost unnoticed, off the body of Eric Garner to be washed into the ocean, now eddying around the bodies of phytoplankton, crab, or bivalve mollusk? We must remain alert to how these differences morph, connect, and come to matter differently. Sinking to the seafloor, we discover not only spam cans and car tires, chemical traces, and carbon takeovers, but also the persistence of the same forces that take breath from some bodies more than others. The undersea of human systems of mastery, dominance, and violence. In the benthos, do we not also find the rotting wrecks of the Middle Passage and the residue of slave bodies forced into the sea? Do we not also find the terror of 268 Syrian refugees drowned 60 miles south of Lampedusa, whose distress signals went unheeded by Italian authorities for hours? Or of the hundreds of asylum seekers who, in spite of the savagely inhospitable Australian border defense turn back the boats policy, nonetheless risked a journey of 6,000 miles only to crash upon the rocks of Christmas Island? Do we not also find the deep connection of Pacific Islanders to their lands slowly sucked up by the rising tides, while continental coal extraction on Indigenous country in Australia continues apace and deep sea mining waits in the wings? Understanding bad weather as making a breathless sea also demands reckoning with the ways in which the Anthropocene or the sixth extinction or the apocalyptic collapse of our planetary systems as we know them comes as no great surprise to Black and colonized bodies whose worlds have long been given over to upheaval and ruptured relation. So we know these things, human violence and the breathless sea, are not unrelated, but we must also refuse their facile equivalence. We must refuse analogy whereby marine hypoxia is like racist death, and instead connect these bad weather systems in their common alibis of force, breathlessness, and power. We must learn to trace their flows into and out of one another while remaining attentive to scales of mattering whose objective measures of comparison have also been dissolved in the strange material admixtures of the sea.